My name is John Passfield, and the title of this reading will be L.M. Montgomery, Video 12, Folktale 3, Matthew and Marilla. So here is my novel, L.M. Montgomery, I Gave You Life, a novel by John Passfield. On the front cover, a photograph of the actual historical L.M. Montgomery about 1938. Now, in 1938, with another world war looming on the horizon and her own personal problems threatening to overwhelm her, acclaimed Canadian author L.M. Montgomery begins to write what she has decided will be her final Anne novel. As she works on the new book, she recalls the days when Anne of Green Gables became a worldwide literary phenomenon and the dilemma that she faced at that time. Two choices: whether to write a series of novels in which Anne would perpetually remain the child the world had come to know and love, or, the second choice, to allow Anne to grow to adulthood with all the agonizing torments of the one who had given her life, L.M. Montgomery. Now, we're talking about three novels. This novel, the one I've just held up, L.M. Montgomery, I Give You Life, in which L.M. Montgomery is a character. Now, that character, L.M. Montgomery, sits down to write what will be Anne of Ingleside, the final novel in which Anne will be a character. As she's working on Anne of Ingleside in 1938, her mind goes back to 1905 when she wrote and then published Anne of Green Gables, the first novel in which Anne was a character, at which time she was given the opportunity to write more Anne novels. There eventually became 8 Anne novels, and at that time she did make the decision whether to keep Anne as a perpetual child or to let Anne grow to adulthood. So obviously, as she's writing the last Anne novel, she's asking herself whether she made the right decision, considering the fact that she herself has had a very difficult adulthood. Now, in the first 3 folk tales that I've read in these video presentations, the main character of this novel, L.M. Montgomery, thinks about actual people. She takes a mass of information about her father, her mother, and herself, and boils that information down, shapes it into folk tales of 16 segments each, one for every chapter of thought, in what you and I think of as a novel, but in what she might think of as just a moment's thought, a 50,000 word moment's thought. Now, in this case, in what I'm going to read today, she's no longer thinking of actual people, she's thinking of characters in her novels. So I will read the folk tales of Matthew, the character, and of Marilla, the character, and then we will talk about them. So the Matthew folk tale, there's one segment in every chapter of thought. There are 16 chapters of thought in the mind of L.M. Montgomery. Let's go to page 6 then, for Matthew. There was a man who met a little girl at a train station. He was looking for a little boy. He and his sister needed help on the farm. He looked around the station, but he saw no little boy. Now, how could such a simple plan go wrong? Okay, then we go to the second chapter of thought, to page 13. So he talked to the station master. I came to fetch a little boy. Me and my sister asked for one. They said they'd send him out from the orphanage. Me and my sister need some help on the farm. Then we go to the third chapter, page 21. The station master wasn't too helpful. Told him there wasn't any boy. The only orphan off the train was a little girl. There she was, sitting on the shingles. Told me he'd better go over and talk to the little girl. Then we go to page 29. Well, how do you talk to a little girl? How do you talk to any female? He'd never talked to a female in his life. Well, his sister was a female. I guess he had to admit to that. Then we go to 37. So he went over to talk to the little girl, but he hardly got to talk She went and told him who he was, and she told him where he lived, told him everything, but why she wasn't a boy. 45. Told him she wondered if he would come. Told him she would have slept in a tree. Told him she wouldn't have been afraid. Told him the cherry tree was white. And if you thought about it, so were marble halls. And then 53. He never asked her about the orphanage. She told him anyway. Told him he wouldn't understand how bad it was. Nobody wanted you if you were living there. He meant to ask if they'd take her back, but well, he let it go. 61. So he took her home in the buggy. Hoped he wouldn't have to talk. Well, he got just what he wanted. She told him all about the journey. He had thought he knew all about it, but he was wrong. 69. He thought the island was just the island. Thought the cherry trees were just trees. Thought the roads were just red for no reason. Never wondered how they got red. If you ever found out, he'd be glad if she'd let him know. Told him a few things about the orphanage, how she imagined she had a new dress, a dress as white as the blossoms, her highest earthly bliss. He didn't see anything wrong with the one she had on. 87. He kept thinking about the asylum. 4 months is a long, long time. She would lie awake and daydream? That was how the girl got along. She would lie awake and imagine all kinds of things. She would imagine she wasn't so skinny. She would imagine she had some parents. She would imagine she was a bride. She would imagine some evil nurse who up and died. She hoped she wouldn't imagine he'd wanted a boy. Or he hoped, she wouldn't imagine he'd wanted a boy. And then from 95, we go to 105. At least she didn't expect him to talk. And she didn't ask him any questions after the one about the red on the roads. She told him all about the journey. She opened up his eyes. She made him see a shining lake instead of a pond. 117. No, not 117. Sorry. Sorry, I had the wrong page number there in my notes. And then she picked out the farm at Green Gables, closed her eyes, and had a dream. Then she opened her eyes and pointed out to him. She had imagined every detail with her eyes closed. He couldn't do that. He had lived there all his life. And then the last one in this folktale, 128. She had talked for 8 long miles. Every other word was home. But home to her was just a dream. Well, if her dream was to live at Green Gables, who was he to murder her dream? He'd tell his sister that they didn't really need a boy. Okay, so that's the folktale of Matthew in the mind of L.M. Montgomery, the character in the novel. Okay, let's go back to page 7 and have a look at the folktale of Marilla, who's also a character in her novels. Okay, page 7, Marilla. There was a lady who lived on a farm. She was an elderly lady and fairly set in her ways. This elderly lady didn't care for girls. Well, girls were all right in their place, but a girl's place was not on this lady's farm. Okay, 14. One day, the lady's brother brought home a little girl. It was a girl, all right, as sure as one's eyes could see. She was sitting right there on the buggy, as plain as day. But why would her brother bring home a little girl? The plan, they'd both agreed, was for him to bring home a little boy. 22. What was going on at the orphanage? Did they know farm work is for boys? Only a city person would ask for a girl. What was wrong with Mrs. Spencer? What was she thinking when she sent a little girl? Then we go to page 30. And this little girl had a lot of ridiculous ideas. What was all this about the most tragical thing that ever happened? What was all this about the white way of delight? What was all this about the shining lake of waters? So many detrimental thoughts in one little head. 38. But there was one thing that the little girl got right. She and her brother didn't want to keep a little girl. She and her brother would want to keep a little boy. And she spoke it right out plain. At least she had to admire the gumption of the girl. And then 46. A boy would be handy around the farm. Her brother was getting older. A boy would be useful to shoulder the burden of some of the chores. But a girl? What use was a girl? What could possibly be the use of a girl on a farm? 54. Little girls were smarter than little boys, always asking why things have to be just so. They would be having flighty thoughts like this one has. Boys would sleep and eat and do their chores. So why would anyone want to raise a little girl? 62. And this little girl was not like other little girls, not like the lady knew any other little girls. Well, she'd been a little girl herself, oh so long ago, but the lady, come to think of it, was not like other little girls at all, even when she used to be a little girl. And this little girl seemed even more different than the lady was when she was a little girl. 70. Her brother seemed to want to keep the little girl, just like a man to have an idea that made no sense at all. A little girl on a farm would be just an ornament. Her fancy dresses would end up splattered with barnyard manure. If a man ever had a practical thought in his head, you could be sure that it was a woman who put it there. And 78. The lady settled down to do some serious thinking. She always tried to think with the head and never the heart. The lady decided not to think of the orphanage. Why think of things that have no practical bearing at all? What does an orphanage have to do with running a farm? 88. Mind you, the girl wasn't quite so flighty as she might at first appear. She had figured out the whole situation at a glance. There was a bluntness that, to the lady, had an appeal. Now, if someone could make the little girl a little less flighty and a little more down to earth, that someone might be rescuing the girl from a life of ridiculous thoughts. Her brother was right that someone could do some good for this girl. And then we go to 96. The lady tried to ignore what the girl had said, that there was no life for her in the orphanage, that nobody cared about anybody there, that they didn't even send the girl to school. The lady was trying not to read between the lines. What did Mrs. Spencer know that she didn't mention? What did the little girl know that she wasn't going to tell? If we keep her, she'll have a decent home and proper schooling. If we send her back, it'll be to who knows what. What would be practical about sending the little girl back? 114. So, let's see now. What was there on the farm that a girl could do? The girl was bright enough to learn. The girl could be taught to cook and sew, help with the weeding in the garden, go to the coop every morning, and collect the eggs. Oh, that's 114, okay. But we're not going to call her Cordelia. Not such an impractical name as that. Never heard such a name before. Never heard anyone on the island called by that name. If she stays, she'll have to go by her real name. Nobody in this house is going to pretend there's somebody else. And then the last segment of this folktale is this. So, if her brother was going to be so stubborn, turning everything upside down and topsy-turvy on a whim, why, she'd take them both in hand and introduce them both to common sense. Get both of their heads down out of the clouds and show them how to plant their feet down firmly, all four of them on the ground. She would have two people to manage instead of one. Serve her brother right for making such a mess of a simple plan. She'd tell her brother they didn't need a little boy. Well, that's the folktale of Marilla. So that's been the folktale of both Matthew and Marilla, the fictional characters in the novels of L.M. Montgomery, who's the main character of this novel. It's interesting that neither Matthew nor Marilla does a lot of thinking about themselves in these folktales. In both cases, I would say they do a lot of thinking about other people. Matthew thinks a lot about Anne. He attempts to see Anne from Anne's point of view. Marilla does a lot of thinking about Anne as well. After trying to avoid thinking of Anne from Anne's point of view of life at the orphanage, she eventually comes around to seeing Anne from Anne's point of view. The little girl who won't get to go to school, for instance, who will live in the orphanage for the rest, well, not for the rest of her life, but for the immediate future, and who knows what happens there. I think it's part of the human phenomenon. We're always reviewing our thoughts. We're always testing our thoughts. We're always adjusting or trying not to adjust our thoughts in light of the new information that's coming to us, whether in a flash at the moment or dawning on us gradually over a length of time. So I suppose we got to ask ourselves, does Matthew's attempt to formulate an opinion, excuse me, an interpretation, an understanding of the phenomenon of Anne's arrival in his life by thinking of Anne through the point of view of Anne herself, expand or diminish, advance or retard his ability to think? Then we can ask the same about Marilla's attempt to formulate an opinion, an interpretation, an understanding of the phenomenon of Anne's arrival in her life by thinking of Anne through the point of view of Anne herself. However, the bulk of this novel is not about Matthew and Marilla. It's about the thoughts, 50,000 words of thoughts, of the main character, L.M. Montgomery, about the people and events of her life. So, we can ask ourselves whether the main character applies this technique to her own life, the technique of thinking of Matthew and Marilla, the thinking technique of Matthew and Marilla, two fictional characters whom she has created, or whether she does not. So, This is my novel, Ella Montgomery. I Gave You Life, a novel by John Passfield. It's found on Amazon. For more information. More information at my publisher's website, roxmillspress.com. There's more information at my website, johnpassfield.ca, in the form of 2 free books, my planning notebook and my reflective journal, both of which are all about this novel and about Ella Montgomery and about Anne the character and the novels, Anne of Green Gables, Anne of Ingleside, and so on. So have a look at those if you're interested. Just by clicking on the cover icons, you can get to read those books. Lastly, I'll say thank you for watching this video.